Are you ready to get casual? Grab your favorite adult beverage or combustible plant and join us for our roundtable TTRPG discussion. Oh yeah, it's time for Casual Friday. And now, here are your hosts.
I'm ready to get casual. Hey, how's it going? We are the Landlocked Warlocks. This is Casual Friday, as the guy just told you. And I am GM Jim Heskett, and we're going to go over here.
I'm Brad Wolf with Dire Den.
I'm Ryan Doyle. I'm at the Vertical Table, and I was born casual.
I was made for this. So right up top, we want to tell you that if you want to have one solid place to chat, because we all co-stream this on our channels, go over to the Landlocked Warlocks. We live stream there. If everybody wants to hang out in the same chat, that'd be a great way to do it. Go watch it on Landlocked Warlocks. So let me tell you what we've got coming up on this show today. Action-packed show. First, we're going to talk about the Amazon Prime Secret Level show. We're going to talk about that D&D episode. I believe we've all seen it, yeah?
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about it. Then I wanted to offer a cool encounter for everyone to steal, an encounter that I played in earlier this week that I thought was pretty interesting. And that'll just take like 10 seconds for me to explain it. Then we're going to talk about D&D maps. They have made a big update, and I'm gonna give a book recommendation. I'm actually gonna recommend two things. One, you gotta stay to the very end of the show, but it'll blow your mind, I swear. I'm gonna talk about I've been playing Dragon Age Veilguard. I'm gonna talk about some interesting TTRPG lessons that I've learned while playing that game that I thought would be good to pass along. Then our roundtable discussion is we're going to talk about high-level Dungeons & Dragons, about running it, playing it, the complexities of it, and maybe pass along some tips for how we've all done it before. And then our main topic in the back end of the show, we're going to continue talking about the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide, Chapter 2. And then at the very end of the show, if you'll stay put, if you stay and watch to the end, I have a wild recommendation that you will not see coming, I promise. These guys don't even know what I'm going to talk about, but it is mind-blowing.
I never know what you're going to talk about.
That's part of the fun. Go ahead.
You might want to read the run sheet, Ryan.
Is that what that is?
There are spoilers for these guys in the run sheet, so they can or can't read it if they like. But first, before we talk about that secret level D&D episode, I wanted to share something real quick. I listened to this podcast called Dungeon Master of None. They put out an episode called Greyhawk Tua earlier this week, and honestly, it's been like 5 days, and I'm still mad that I did not think of this joke first. I'm mad about it. I'm really mad. It's so obvious. It's right there. How come I didn't see it? Am I getting old? Am I slipping?
Well, you were feeling under the weather last week, Jim, so maybe.
Maybe that's true. So Ryan, you want to tell us about the D&D episode of Secret Level?
I mean, sure. So it's on Amazon Prime, which I'm currently not subscribed to. I cycle through for financial reasons and for sanity reasons. I recommend everybody consider my approach to streaming now, which is only having one or two going at a time. So it doesn't take you 20 minutes to figure out what service you're going to spend 20 minutes looking at shows on before you even start watching something and your dinner's cold. So this was not on my radar. I mean, there's been buzz about it. I knew there was a D&D episode. I'm going to be honest, I didn't really have super high expectations. I thought it was going to be like an unpacking of D&D or something. And I audibly said things probably I could probably repeat them, but I cursed quite a bit at the end of the very short episode of it. That it was very good. It was one of the best things I've seen in a minute. D&D or otherwise. The animation was incredible. The story was like super tight. They didn't hand anything to you. They respected the audience to figure it out and catch up. I think if you had zero understanding of D&D, it would still be super approachable and enjoyable. It's actually in my back pocket now for there's a couple people on a list that are going to get this. and like this is what D&D is like. This is why you should spend 3-4 hours with us nerds one evening. And if you do know what D&D is like, there are very recognizable spells and abilities popping off the whole time, but they're not. It's not like Hadouken. They're not like saying it. They're not telegraphing it. It's just like clearly evident what's happening the whole time. If you know, and if you don't know, it's fine. I'm almost like it's very short, so I don't want to like spoil it. But there's some like recognizable Forgotten Realms lore and just some beautiful like set pieces that I 100% will describe at my table, like this bridge. Woo!
How cool is that?
That's the coolest bridge I've seen. That's awesome. The I also like the fact that like even in a 15-minute episode, you kind of get the different flavors of the game, right? Like the intro has kind of like some horror vibes to it, and then there's the kind of setup dialogue, which very role play like scene. And then the end is the big epic hero battle, right? So it's like, all the elements of, the game are worked into this 15 minutes. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, it felt like D&D. Very first, like from the jump, the premise, there's a kid in a cage. You can see it in like the preview on the D&D channel right now. And the party literally argues very quickly, succinctly. It's all very snappy, but like there's disagreement about what we're doing, and the paladin kind of wins, right? And they're like, all right, this is a rescue mission now.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very D&D, and then they're having a long rest and arguing about what to do next to a degree. They're in a tiny hut. You don't even realize till they walk out, and there's just so many quick little details, like lovingly produced. Like the people who made it know and love D&D.
Yeah, like there was one moment where there's a dwarf character, a very swarthy, dirty-faced dwarf character who I assumed was a barbarian, and then there's the combat at the end of the episode, and they shoot an arrow, and he catches the arrow, spins around, and flings it back. I was like, holy crap, he's a monk!
He's a monk.
That was awesome.
Yeah,
it was really great. The animation is great. Like I don't know what else I could say that these guys haven't already said, but I loved it, and I really wasn't expecting to, because I'd seen some early reviews of Secret Level as a whole, and it doesn't seem like the reviews are that great of the thing as a whole. A lot of them are saying, why does this exist? Because I hear I haven't seen it, but apparently there's a gritty Pac-Man reboot among one of these episodes, and I haven't seen it, but I'm going to watch it because this sounds like the worst thing that's ever been made. And if they make it amazing, I will come back and say, I'm sorry, Gritty Pac-Man is amazing, but...
Yeah. The other thing is, like, I love the fact that you can just steal ideas from this kind of media. Like, I think the idea of, like, the scene in the cage at the beginning, would it be a great way to start an adventure? Like, have the players inside the cage. Right, and they can't see out because the cage is covered in this tarp, and they can kind of see through the cracks, right? And something is going on outside of the cage, and that's your setup, right? So they're trying to guess, they're making perception checks, they're trying to look out the cage. That's the one idea that like hit me in watching this. So that's an idea I'm going to steal, and I'm going to start a game that way.
Brad, have you ever read Out of the Abyss?
Yeah.
The beginning of that is sort of similar, where the party's in prison, and then as they begin to make their escape plans, they come to realize that they are in a cave, that there's nothing hundreds of feet below. It's like you're in a prison, yeah, but this prison is like webbed to the top of a cave, and it's very difficult to get out. It's very scary beginning when you realize that getting out is just the beginning. You have to survive.
Yeah.
Speaking of stealing ideas, let's move on to the next thing. And earlier this week on a Wednesday, my Wednesday group that I play with, we had a very fun encounter. We are all very high level, and we are going through this dungeon. We get to this dungeon level, and my character has very high passive perception, so the DM tells me, hey, you hear something rumbling below the ground. So my character tells everybody, all right, let's move out of the way. We move out of the way, and he says, nope, still rumbling. We move a little bit further, and then a Remoraz comes bursting up through the ground, right? So roll initiative, we start fighting the Remoraz. And then when it gets to my turn, the DM says, you still hear rumbling below your feet. And then at the beginning of the next turn, a purple worm comes out of the same hole, eats the Remoraz, and then begins attacking us. Beginning of the next turn, a brown worm, which is this a homebrew monster? I don't even never heard of a brown worm, but it's bigger than the purple worm, comes out, smashes the purple worm. So that's our real fight. Real fight doesn't begin until the third round. Everything we did in the first 2 rounds, those monsters just died. They got eaten by bigger monsters. And I'm wondering if maybe my DM was inspired by that Phantom Menace scene where they're being pursued underwater and there's always a bigger fish.
Yep.
But anyway, steal that. That sounds like fun. You know, a creature gets eaten by a bigger creature, and that is the real threat. So, anyway, I thought that was a fun idea. You guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've never done like a 3-layer one. Like that's very turducken. But yeah, I've done that before, and it's kind of a cool like way to like sink some resources. You know, if the party's fully rested but you want to make it a little more of a challenge, because they're gonna cast some spells or use some abilities on that first monster, and then the second monster is the real objective, right?
I've done it where there's a little more like ambiguity and choice involved. Like it's easier like on an outdoor encounter than when the thing erupts from beneath you, you're gonna fight it. But when like you see this thing is charging at you, what do? You can decide to attack or you can decide to get out of its way, and then it turns out it's being pursued by something. And do you take sides or do you let it play out and then get involved? That's also kind of the way I design most, if not all, of my homebrew, to the point where I've been like correcting it, where like it's more stretched out over time, but it's always like a series of dominoes. You're fighting these goblins because in 20 levels, this dragon took over the mountaintop and there's a cascade of monsters vying for territory now. But yeah, there's always a bigger fish.
Yeah. Yeah. I also like to do the like the baby monster, and then the mama monster shows up, right? Like you can do it with like a Grick and an alpha Grick, or something to that effect. Or you can have a young, like use a brown bear stat block for a young owlbear, and then mama brown bear or mama owlbear shows up. And
I give mama owlbear rage. If you hurt baby owl, like straight up, sure. I've stolen rage and put it on an owlbear. It's just like, well, nope. Now she's pissed. You thought owlbears were scary.
I've definitely done before the making players think that they're about to face the boss monster when the real boss monster is, in the room beyond that. I actually once pulled like the video game thing. When you're in a video game and you get to a small chamber and there's a bunch of healing potions and you're like, okay, all right, I know what's in the next room. I literally did that. It was like a waiting room. There were windows you could see. There's a big arena in the other room. There's a bunch of healing potions on a table. But that wasn't the boss fight. The real boss fight was after that. They were mad at me for that for a little while. Then they forgave me and realized my genius. So speaking of things that may or may not be genius, or not, probably not though, but the next thing that we're going to talk about is the D&D Beyond Maps application received a big update, and I think this is continuing my theory that they are sunsetting encounters, D&D Beyond's encounters, and going to be integrating all that stuff into maps, because you can now, before you could create encounters in maps by basically selecting a bunch of tokens and adding them to a thing, but it was mostly just initiative, whereas now you can... Where the red barrels scatter. Exactly. Now you can actually run the combat from the stat blocks inside D&D Beyond Maps. They've moved maps from alpha to beta, and I don't know, I've been using encounters since it came out, since like 2019. It's never come out of beta. It's always been missing some things, but maps is definitely missing the ability to filter monsters. You can search for a token here, but in encounters, you can go in and you can say, I want creatures that would appear in a coastal environment between these CRs that are this size. And you can't do any of that here, so hopefully that gets added. And there's no ability to create this encounter and then save it somewhere, which is what's great for the encounters tool, is that I can populate a whole dungeon with encounters that I may or may not use, and that could potentially save me a crap ton of time when I'm actually running the session if I've got 5 possible encounters that I could use. And I don't see any way to save that in maps, so hopefully that gets added. Have either of you used the maps tool or poked around in it?
I haven't. I did see a video that came out, I think just like this week or last week, where they were talking about adding monsters, like where you can actually click on the link and go to their stat block and read the info about the monster from the maps. That's the functionality they just added, or they are going to add.
Yeah, I believe so. I think that's right.
So they definitely seem to be giving it some love, which makes sense, because it looks like it could be a really good tool if they continue to fine tune it, but don't overdo it. That's often my problem with VTTs, is they end up giving you so many options, then that it gets unwieldy.
Yeah, and this is what Fred is asking in the chat, and I still think it's at least as of a couple weeks ago when I was poking around in it, it's still more simple than Roll20. It's more complex than the Owlbear 1. It's about the same as Owlbear 2. Owlbear 2 is significantly more complex than the old version. I think it's about on par with that.
Which is, as an Owlbear Rodeo enthusiast, that was the appeal. Like, I enjoyed the first one. Like, I don't like, there's like a couple of the updated features that I'll use, but like, I want it bare bones, and that's my style. Your mileage may vary, but like, I don't need dynamic lighting. I don't need 2 hours of prep on the VTT side of things, as well as all the other prep that I'm doing. I want it to be real basic. I don't care if every token is a perfect match. Like, all right, the skull is every undead creature right now. Oh, we have 2 kinds of undead. Okay, this compass point thing, that's the zombies now. Keep it moving. Yeah, I don't know. I don't love my D&D to feel too much like a video game.
Then you definitely won't like the 3D one that's coming out. When is that? Next year sometime, probably?
We'll see.
Yeah, Sigil, are they sticking with that name?
I don't know.
It is strange to me that they're working on 3, and okay, it seems like they are only working on 2. But why not just work on 1 twice as hard and have like a completed product? It's like, why are we simultaneously working on 2 distinct VTT setups?
Well, I think we've speculated before that the reason they're doing maps is because it's going to run easily on most platforms, where like we're assuming that the Sigil being based on the Unreal Engine is going to be pretty high demand, and you're only going to be able to really use it well if you have a high-end PC.
I think probably partially it's also they're trying to sell more books. An unbeatable advantage on Roll20 is you can buy the book on Roll20 and then actually use it in a game, in a VTT. And you couldn't do that before. D&D Beyond was only compendium, so they probably said, hey, we're losing too many dollars to Roll20 from GMs who are buying the books there and running them there. What if we had that? And so, because now whenever they put out new books, they come maps ready. And they're slowly adding in more and more of their older titles into maps. So, and it's probably helping them sell more books.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If you already have the compendium there, you don't want to rebuy everything in Roll20. This just gives you another reason to not migrate over to Roll20 if you're looking for both of those things in one go.
Yeah. I mean, we know from the Apple model, right, that it's, if you can create an ecosystem and keep your customer in that ecosystem, you're going to make more money. Like that's how, Apple's done it, and they've done it insanely well. And even though we know what we're getting into, people still dive in head first.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on this? Are you guys ready to move on?
I think I'm good.
All right. So if you don't mind, if we just all stop by Jim's Corner real quick. Sorry, out of the way, Ryan. So recently I was seeing, I didn't know why, but I was seeing a book recommendation pop up on social media a lot, at least I'm in some bookish corners of social media. And I was seeing the book Project Hail Mary pop up a lot. This is the third book by Andy Weir. If you know that name, he was probably from The Martian. He was kind of like the indie author of success. Did you know The Martian he sold it for $1.99? That's the reason why it rocketed up to the bestseller list. It was self-published. He didn't know how to price it for free. Amazon doesn't let you price a book for free, so he priced it at 99 cents. And it hit the bestseller list, turned into a movie, all that stuff. He's like one of our greatest success stories. But he wrote 3 books, The Martian, Artemis, and his last book came out in 2021, and it was called Project Hail Mary, and I've just seen a lot of people talking about this on social media lately. And the reason why is that they've announced they're making a movie. Drew Goddard is writing, Phil Lord and Chris Miller are directing, so it's got a lot of pedigree behind it. And I think this is one of my favorite novels. It's one of the best novels ever written, I think, which is kind of weird coming from Andy Weir, because The Martian is clunky and it's fun, but it's very clunky. He's gotten much better as a writer, and this book has the kind of, you can see I purchased it there in 2021. I still think about this book. It's one of those that like stays with me, especially the ending. It's just brilliant. The book is The Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. That's my recommendation of the week. Now you guys talk for a second so I can take a drink.
I read and enjoyed both The Martian and Project Hail Mary. There is a Adam Sandler vehicle that is suspiciously similar to Project Hail Mary in a lot of ways, which I found odd. There's a lot of, I wouldn't quite call it hard sci-fi, but like there's a lot of science in his sci-fi. I wouldn't call it like high literature, which is okay. But he does rely a lot on the science side of things. And there's a couple, and like even like linguistics in Hail Mary, and there's some very there's holes in the plot. I'll put it that way. Yeah, it's all a little easy. There's a lot of cool stuff. Not hating. Would read it again. But it's just it's a little too easy for communication to be established, I think, in some ways.
Well, you should all go read it so you can prove Ryan wrong.
Come on.
It's brilliant. And Ryan is clearly incorrect in his opinion. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the video RPG Dragon Age Veilguard. Came out a couple months ago. Maybe 2 months ago, a month ago, I don't even know, but I just got it a couple weeks ago. Been playing the crap out of it. It's great, and I think I mentioned it last week. I think I recommended it last week, but I finished it, or well, I had an ending. Maybe I'll talk about that. But I learned some very interesting lessons from game design kinds of lessons from the way this game is run, and I should have a whole bunch of graphics to go along with this, but I don't, because this is Casual Friday, and we don't do that shit here. So it's a team-based RPG. You're the leader of a team. You go out, you recruit your team, you go on missions for them. There's one main mission. And in this story, the team bonding is very important in a way that team bonding translates into mechanical benefits. So the more time you spend talking to your companions, doing their side quests, and also agreeing with them in group conversations, it increases their rank. It calls it the bond. It says your bond has increased, but it really just, that's how they level up. They level up by you level them up by being good to them. And so the more time you spend with them, the more you do this, the more powerful they get. And this has significant impact on the end of the story, which I didn't realize until yesterday when I played the end of the story. I made some very poor choices. Everyone, including me, died. So I'm going to go back and redo some things. I made some pretty bad choices, and I neglected some things I shouldn't have. And yeah, it was pretty brutal. Also, just like that team building, there's faction alliance. There are factions all over the countryside. When Brad talks about factions a lot, you have, depending on how your relationship with these factions is, there's a metric, there's an actual score that tracks. And during the game, it seems like this metric is mostly just like if you have a higher rank, you get better deals at the shop and that kind of stuff. But this also plays into the end of the game, because the more you've helped these factions, the stronger they are and the better they are able to contribute to the end battle. And so these kind of choices weigh extremely heavily. There's a part late in the game where you have to choose, basically, it doesn't say this, but it's kind of implied you're going to choose to send one of two of your teammates to their death. And when you do that, after that, there's a fantasy sequence where you have to interact with that dead player and that dead NPC, and they throw things you said in the game back in your face. Dialogue choices you made. They say, I only did that because you told me that we have to do whatever it takes to win. So that's why I sacrificed myself. And it's effing brutal emotionally to have these choices thrown back in my face. And it's brilliant, and I love it, and we should steal it for D&D. Also, another thing outside of the mechanics is that they do one thing in the game really well, because you have 7 teammates, so there's a lot of side stories. It can be a lot to keep track of, but each one of your allies has a thing they care about, and that's why we like them. And I've said this many times, that emotional connections create stakes. Mm-hmm. That is the main way. That's one of the main ways you create stakes in any story. And so your companion Nev, she loves Docktown, even though it's dirty and crime-ridden. She loves it, and she wants it to become a better city. And that's why we care about Nev, because she loves something. There's the Mornwatch guy, Emmerich. He cares about spirits of the dead being able to pass on. Like, because the companions have these things they care about, we care about them. Like, watching somebody love something makes us appreciate that person in a way much more than watching somebody be indifferent or hate something. And so those are my takeaways from Dragon Age Veilguard. I think you can use some of that faction strength and that companion strength among the party to do things like give boons. And I've been kind of working on a system on the side. It's definitely not ready for prime time, about ways that you could use role play among the party to create mechanical boons. That's some kind of a project I've been working on the side for a while, but I don't know if you guys have played Veilguard. I don't think you have, but what are your thoughts on all of that?
I like the idea of definitely like rewarding role play with mechanical benefits. I like that. And I think that was kind of the goal of Inspiration with 5th edition, but it doesn't come out that way oftentimes. But yeah, I'm curious to see like how like you could manufacture some like mechanical benefits that would allow you to reward the inter party role play.
Yeah.
In the old DMG, there was Prestige, I think it was called, Renown. So there's always been these ideas of how to like make a mechanical score keeping system, at least with the factions. Within the party is harder because you're going to get into like PC control boundary territory. But I think it's like right there, and I've never seen it actually done well, where it's not just like, here's an idea of a concept, Dungeon Master, you build something and run it while you're running everything else in this game. I will say I'm doing on one of my tables, we're playing Ghost of Saltmarsh, and it's an anthology. It's a bunch of different adventures, but there are threads between them, and one of those threads is the Sahaugen have disrupted. Again, there's always a bigger fish. These lizard folk are buying weapons from these pirates, smugglers. They're selling weapons to these lizard folk. These lizard folk are here because of the Sahaugen. That's not tiers of play, but that's 3 levels of play. Mm-hmm. What the party does with the lizard folk and a little less so other aquatic races determines who's showing up for the battle, which is still probably a month away at my table, against the Sahaugen stronghold. So there's real story consequences. They went there to figure out what the lizard folk are doing. There was a little 10-15 minute conversation about, like, we could just go back and tell the townsfolk anything and they'll pay us. We don't actually have to do this one. And it was very close to going that way, and that would have had lasting impacts on the story side. I don't have like a faction health bar that I can show them. They're not. It's like it's running a subsystem. The players aren't as aware of it. It's more narrative based. But they're becoming more and more aware of it now as like the campaign is building up to this big confrontation.
Yeah, I've definitely had cool moments in campaigns, not specifically planned, where players had multiple positive interactions with the faction, and then at some point later in the campaign, I'm on the verge of a total party kill, and I'm like, what the hell am I going to do? And then I've got these NPCs from this faction that they've been good to, and those NPCs kind of ride to the rescue. Like the Riders of Rohan, right? Come in to save the day, and it doesn't feel like a Deus Ex Machina when you do that with a faction that the players have invested in. It feels like a payoff, and I've had that probably 3 times, just kind of happen organically throughout the years I've been playing it. That always felt really cool when that happens.
I've also looked for ways and found ways for fallout of not helping completing quest lines. Either there's like competing adventurers, right, who are like sweeping up all the crumbs of the story. So all those loops do get closed, but somebody else is getting the gold and the glory. Or these like good aligned factions get into real trouble and create power vacuums, and that's the entrance of the bigger fish.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, speaking of bigger fish, well, why don't we move on to our roundtable discussion topic of the week? We're going to talk about high-level Dungeons & Dragons and the complexity of it, because one reason is that I'm playing in a high-level D&D campaign right now. That Wednesday group I mentioned, I'm an 18th level, 17 levels of Ranger, 1 level of Rogue, and everybody else in the party is either 17 or level 18. Some of us got special boons, and it's wild. It is very, very wild. We were a very low roleplay, high combat kind of group anyway, so most of the time we get into combats. If it's a serious combat, we're talking 2 sessions, maybe 3 sessions, 4-hour sessions sometimes. We've been in combats we had one combat that was like spread across 5 sessions, part of the first one, part of the last one, but 3 full sessions. That was pretty bonkers. It's pretty strategic. And so one of the things I wanted to share, that this is, I did this and then afterward looked at it and I was like, this is crazy. That I made a matrix of damage possibilities for my Ranger. And part of the reason I did this is because when I'm taking my turn and my turn is taking a long time, I'm like, I'm a Ranger. I'm shooting 2 arrows. Why is my turn taking 10 minutes? Because I have to consider all of these there's many different ways I can fire those 2 arrows. And so this is just the damage. This isn't even the 2 hit rolls. And I was thinking about high-level D&D and how the best way to present it, because my Dungeon Master for this group does a pretty good job. The combats are pretty intense, but there's also a good mix of, I wouldn't say puzzles, but I would say things that test the player's strategic ability, because our PCs can do almost literally anything. We were in a recent combat where we had made friends with a lich. It's a long story, don't ask, but we were hiding in this lich's tower. There was an assault on the tower. Our wizard leaned out the front door of the tower and cast reverse gravity. We all floated up to the roof of the first floor, but everyone assaulting the tower was just nullified. So a 7th level spell could completely nullify an entire massive combat, because high level characters could do anything. But I was thinking about B-Dave, brother B-Dave Walters, who was in an interview a few years ago, and he was talking about running high-level combat. And he said when you get to a certain power level, it's not about what you can do, it's about what you should do, as the dilemma and the challenge, where the challenge should derive from. Curious what level Jim's campaign started at. Phil, it's Dungeon of the Mad Mage. We started at level 5 about 3 years ago, and we are almost at the end. Then after that, B-Dave proved that he eats his own dog food, because he ran a level 21 shot. It's one of those charity things. Robbie Damon was there. Brendan Lee Mulligan was there. It was when Brendan Lee Mulligan, he tried to make a character that could do the most damage that had ever been done. And I think he did. He had like 9. He got a multi-class character that had 9 attacks somehow. I don't know how that happened, but so in this game, the story hook is there's these 20th level adventurers. They're wandering around. They see a town full of orcs. The orc town appears to be peaceful. There are little orc children running around. There are orc farmers baling hay, milking cows. It's just a little peaceful village. Then along come this group of giant adventurers who say, "Hello, well met, fellow adventurers. We are on our way to slaughter this village of evil orcs. Will you come with us and assist us?" And then that is the moral quandary that's put before the players, because, of course, they can slaughter that village full of orcs, probably in 2 rounds, with just a couple fireballs. But should they? Then that becomes the thrust of the adventure going forward. So, what do you guys think about that, or other thoughts on high-level D&D?
Brad, you're on mute.
My bad. I think high-level D&D needs to be more about like choices that you make, right? Because it can't always be about, here's the problem, here's the solution. Players have to figure out the solution, right? Because you have so many options with your high-level characters, right? There's so many different things you can do, so many world-bending spells. As a DM, it's practically impossible to figure out every, possible solution, right? So I think the goal becomes creating scenarios, and then just expecting the players to come up with their own solutions, not trying to set up a specific solution. The setting up specific solutions is for low level play, where okay, the way to get through this door is to twist the statue to the right, you move the statue, it opens the secret door, right? That's predictable and straightforward. Once you're at high level play, it's too unpredictable. You just have to prep the villain's plot, right? What's the villain's plan versus trying to script out, the adventure.
I find combat rather difficult to create interesting, who's going to win scenarios. So who's going to win in time? How much collateral damage is there going to be? Are we going to preserve the holy site that we are fighting within? Is the ritual going to get off in 3 rounds? even with like the bigger fish to bigger fish, which is fun, I feel a little handcuffed as a DM in high level combat. I can make the numbers as big as I want, but if I start pulling out of my toy box all the cool stuff that the players have, it is a lot less fun to play D&D. If I start banishing people and if I start taking people out of the combat, it sucks. And that's true at level 5 with like hold person on a character. You can do it once in a while for flavor, but you almost can't fight fair as a DM at high levels of play. So you have to find other alternative like win conditions to set up, or it's just a numbers game and just waves and waves of mooks putting up okay numbers. But and maybe this is just a Ryan thing, but I am shy to bring out the nukes that the players are inevitably going to be lobbing at me most fights, because it does feel a lot less fun to have like, all right, I'm going to give this dragon now has stunning strike. Make a save. You failed. Okay, I'll talk to you next. I'll get back to you in an hour because combat takes forever, and we'll see if you get to go or not. Isn't my idea of a fun game night.
Yeah, well, and like folks saying in the chat, like you have to make other objectives in combat. Like you can't just have the combat be about hit points.
Yeah,
right. It's a matter of you have to close the portal before Tiamat shows up, right? You have to rescue these innocent people so they're not collateral damage when you're fighting the Tarask, right? Like there has to be other objectives around the combat itself to raise the stakes, because like you said, Ryan, it's hard to just raise the stakes by trying to make it more deadly, right? So yeah, one thing that I've always said about high level D&D is you have to shift gears from like dungeon crawl, right, to more like Star Wars mid-level play, right, where there's like the big bad, there's like a an epic story, a heroic arc, and then high level play is more like Justice League or the Avengers, right? You've got to be thinking like superhero level, save the world, or how not to step on the ants while you're trying to fight the bad guy, right? Like the idea of like shifting gears in your storytelling mindset.
Let's see what the chat's saying. Fred is totally right. 5e monsters don't do enough damage at high level. In my Wednesday group, we had a TPK at level 15. We made some poor choices. It was our fault. We got cocky. We had a TPK. But then our new party since then, I've never been down to half my hit points. It's never even come close to danger since then, really. I mean, I've been in danger. I've been like in serious situations where I could have been teleported away or other stuff like that. But physical danger, no, it's not even really something I worry about with that PC, because I'm a ranger, I'm away. Also, I have 170 hit points. It's a lot. Well,
one thing, just a tip mechanically that I've started doing is for, once I get, tier 3, is I will use static damage and roll. So using the static damage number to replace the plus. So something does 4d6 plus 6 damage, right? And so what would the static number be on that?
14?
Yeah, like around 4. Yeah. So instead, I'll use the static number of 14 and roll the 4d6.
Oh.
Right?
So everything's a crit?
Well, kind of, right? But that's a way to like significantly increase damage output Um, and I think that is really one of the things that makes the fight drag, is like the monsters just don't do enough damage. I say it's actually better to increase damage output than it is to increase hit points. So increasing hit points just makes things take longer. I would rather have 3 rounds of like just, oh my god, we're getting hammered by this thing. Oh, whew, now it's dead, right?
Yeah, the best piece of D&D advice, best piece of Dungeon Master advice I ever heard was Matt Mercer on an interview. He just said, hey, if you want to make your monsters more dangerous, have them hit harder. And I was like, oh, that's simple and perfect, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, and also giving your monsters a high level, like a spell-like ability or like a recharge ability, so they hit really hard on the first turn. That ratchets up the tension, right? And it works with dragons, right? Dragons are fairly well designed. Like, you hit the party with the breath weapon, they're like, oh shit, that hurt, right? And then the action economy, because of legendary actions, kind of keeps the fight going, right? But the dragon typically doesn't really hit as hard ever again unless that breath weapon recharges. I mean, if the breath weapon recharges 3 turns in a row, you might have a TPK on your hand. So you got to be careful with that. But those kind of things, it's better to hit as hard as you can in that first turn, shake the players, and then, the fight ends, 2 or 3 rounds later. But if you just increase hit points, then the thing just drags on to like turn 4, turn 5, and that's where your fights end up taking, an hour and a half.
Yeah, it's also very good to get a good sense of how much average damage your party is doing every turn. Because if you know that, then you can pretty easily plan for encounters. If I'm going to throw enough hit points that this should last for 3 rounds. Because if you don't know how much average damage they're doing, and that barbarian does 112 damage, across 2 attacks and a bonus action attack, and then just mowed your way through half of your forces, then you're crazily adding in the second wave, and trying to act like you intended to add that second wave in the whole time.
Yeah. Well, and if the monster has a cool ability that you really want to use, right? Use it right away, right? If the monster has 2 really cool abilities, you use 1 first round, 1 second round, because you really kind of want to like end the fight by in the end of the 3rd round, right? Combat that takes more than 3 rounds, I think, gets dull. And so that's where you can also give monsters, extra, like, whether you're using legendary actions or layer actions, or give the monster an extra reaction or bonus action ability, so that you can maybe use 2 really cool abilities on the first turn, right? Front load the combat is what I'm saying.
Yeah, one of the things I like about Flea Mortals is a lot of the higher CR monsters in there have their cool opening ability that, like Brad said, that you should definitely have your monsters do their coolest thing in round 1, because a lot of them are going to live to round 2 anyway. So unleash their coolest thing. But a lot of the higher CR monsters have like a last gasp kind of attack. It's like when they reach a certain level of health, or only after a certain number of rounds, then they get like their second, like you thought their opening round thing was most intense, but this is even more. And I think that's very fun design.
Yeah, and I'm hoping we're going to see some of that with high-level monsters in the new monster manual, because the bloodied condition is back in the game.
Yeah, that's one thing I was wondering about, because in 4E they had bloodied, but it's also integrated to a lot of the things, like once a monster becomes bloodied, X happens, right?
It's a very neat way to get to that like 2-stage boss fight, where it's like, this isn't even my final form, boom, and now it feels like 2 combats in a way. You kind of get away from that like 5 rounds of combat being boring, you burn this thing down for 2 rounds, and now that's the halfway point, but it's the next 2 rounds might be 3 because it's harder, it's hitting harder, you might have to fall back, and it feels like distinct things. It's not just pushing the same button again and again.
I like this.
I do that too. I use players -1, right? The monster's turn. The monster, if it's a singular like boss battle, right, which is a bad idea, unless it has as many actions as the players. So it takes its turn, and then after everybody's turn, it's keeping up.
Phil's way. When last campaign monsters miss, they deal average damage. If they hit, I roll on top of it. Cannot avoid damage. That is intense. That's pretty hardcore, Phil. But hey, for you two guys here, speaking of the monster manual and significant damage, how are you both feeling about running 5.5 D&D? Because you're both running it, right?
Mm-hmm.
How's it going? With combat, I mean.
Yeah, combat. We're sticking to low level play. I think I mentioned this before. We're only doing levels 1 through 5. So I've got 4 different adventures prepped, and we're halfway through the first one. And low level play, I'm not noticing a significant issue with the monsters. But I already tweak my monsters by, like I said, I use static damage plus a dice. So like I'll use static damage plus a d6. And then I've been doing that, and that significantly, helps with consistent damage output. And then the other thing I do is I often give my monsters a bonus action or a reaction.
Mm-hmm.
So I was already doing that. I started doing that after Tasha's came out. So I've just continued to do that, and the damage output of the monsters has been fine for the damage output of the new, the new edition. The other thing I also like, and the players really felt it in our just last night when we played, is the healing spells. That the healing spells feel much better to use in combat because they heal twice as much almost as they used to.
Yeah, we're just hitting 6 now. And yeah, we don't have new monsters yet, so it still does kind of feel like I'm playing half of a new game. I set my monster HP to max immediately, and then we'll bring it back down. Not every time, but most of the time. If it's a significant fight, if I want this thing to last a couple rounds, I've got 4 to 6 players any given night. I actually want combat to go long enough so everybody gets to do 2 things, especially if they've been waiting a while to do it. So I will set HP to max. I will buff encounters with more creatures more often than tinkering with the actions of the creatures themselves, unless they are named, basically. And so far so good. I've seen the stuff that I've complained about has been more back in my day, sleep was cooler because you rolled a bunch of dice. There hasn't been a lot of, this is dumb. The things that I don't like, I see the arguments for, and most of those arguments are for simplification. They made command less creative because there's only whatever it is. Here are the 5-6 commands you can give when you cast command, and there's been quite a few choices like that, where part of me is I prefer more options and variety, but I see why you did that, and it makes things faster. Weapon mastery, I was afraid of, and it did bog us down quite a bit initially because we're a pretty analytical group. I am interested in talking about these things anyway because we're switching systems, so we'll weigh options and strategies and stuff. I'm rolling in the open, so it is a very halfway to a war gamey sort of table, at least my one table, and it hasn't been that big of a deal. One, because as you level up, it's more and more spells being cast. But yeah, I haven't had a ton of bog down from that, which I expected. Healing's way better, for sure.
Yeah, we've added a couple of new players who are more casual gamers. So they keep forgetting to use their weapon mastery.
Mm.
That's something I'm realizing I need to be, better at reminding them to use. But my player who's the one that is like always trying to get creative and do wild stuff in game really loves weapon mastery because he's always, I can knock somebody down, I can shove them, I can do this. Like he really likes the weapon mastery features. So we'll see as my players learn more about using weapon mastery. But I don't think it's going to bog down play as much as I was concerned about. But right now I only have one player that's consistently using it. So we'll see it once the rest of them start to figure it out.
I will say one thing I've been thinking about, and I'm probably not going to do anything about it, but I've got a rogue. The rogue has steady aim now. If they don't move, they can get advantage, and that procs their sneak attack, and that makes the rogue better and easier, and kind of boring. I'm watching that player like disengage a little bit because the whole like run and hide was like a very pivotal part of the gameplay loop of a rogue. Had them interacting with the environment, and now it's like, well, it's better if I just stand here and fire a crossbow. And okay, cool, I get advantage. I'm going to do more damage. DPS goes up over time. That's math, and it's not super emotionally engaging for a lot of people. So I don't think I love that aspect so far.
Phil said, command is a drop-down menu. It's like they stole it from Baldur's Gate 3. It's like they're like, Baldur's Gate 3 actually does this better, so let's steal that.
Well, my combats are definitely longer than 10 minutes.
Yeah, I don't know how a 5-minute combat is possible at level 9.
Yeah, my combats are definitely longer than that. But of course, I also have, usually 5 to 7 players. So,
we were looking at what I knew was going to be a long one because it was kind of a twofer, and we had 90 minutes left of because we're playing in a game shop. There's a hard out. We had 90 minutes left, and I was legitimately thinking like, do I want to end this session? Do I want to cut this session in half essentially because we BS a lot in the beginning, so I don't end in the middle of a fight? And I was like, yeah, I'll do it. I'll push on it. I'll cut out the crosstalk and I'll keep it moving. And sure enough, 90 minutes later, it's like, all right, this is where we're going to pick it up. And that's not a bad thing. That's fun sometimes. Start in the middle of a fight. It's like, oh boy, I hope we're going to get out of that one. But like, that's exceptional. But I've legitimately had, 2-hour fights at whatever. That was level 5.
All right. So I think it's time to move on to our main topic. We've been chatting for an hour, so we should get to the main topic. We are continuing to talk about the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide. And last time, Ryan wasn't here. Welcome back, Ryan, by the way. Last time, Brad and I were going through Chapter 2, Running the Game, and we got to the running social interaction part. And so the game has some very limited advice here on role-playing NPCs and how to bring them to life using silly voices and facial expressions, etc. Either of you want to tackle this topic right here? Get some initial thoughts on running social interaction?
Well, I mean, I think at its core, social interactions include all the tips that you give for role play, like all the things that we talk about when we want good role play, sharing the spotlight, like what you talked about earlier, Jim, the emotional connections. There's so many things that go into it. So I don't know how you put all of that into, a Dungeon Master's Guide without that being a whole chapter unto itself. I feel like you could do a whole chapter on just roleplay.
Sure. There is one thing here that I wanted to point out under the NPC portrayal section. It says the classic advice for writers holds true: show, don't tell. And I would like to speak on this as someone who is a writer, that this is sometimes bad advice. Show, don't tell isn't always good advice. Like here's a scenario. So the party enters a tavern and they're going to meet a contact. They see the contact sitting at a table far across the bar. And then someone in the party is going to say, how does she seem? Okay, roll an insight check. I got a 19. So you see her shoulders are slumped. She's leaning over, her head is down. Her eyes seem a little misty. She's lazily tracing her finger around the top rim of the glass as condensation you can see is puddling. The drink's been sitting there for a long time. She seems to be almost mumbling to herself a little bit, withdrawn, as if trying to turn herself into a circle. Or you could say you got a 19. She seems kind of sad. And so the thing is, you'll notice they say show, don't tell because I painted a full effing picture of this person in your mind, describing them across the room. You also notice it took me a lot longer to do it.
Right.
And so telling gets a bad rap because we are visual creatures and we like to see stuff. Sometimes telling is the optimal way to deliver information, especially if showing either takes too long or the intended audience doesn't get what you're trying to show them. Because I could listen to that description and go, she seems anxious about something. She's worried about meeting somebody, and I may have been trying to describe her as depressed.
Mm-hmm.
But you could get the wrong impression from my visualization if you're not picturing it in the same way I am. So that's all. Show, don't tell. Sometimes bad advice.
Because you're talking to 4 or 5 people who are also running other processes simultaneously. They're doing a lot of math, and if it takes one of them to be like, oh, someone stood her up. Now that's well, okay. I see how you got there, but no. Either I have to go into telling mode, or roll with it. And it's like I've been being more and more and more explicit, especially with the more people at the table. The odds increase that one of them didn't catch the drift. There's different kinds of people. They process information differently. Some people don't have anything like visual going on in their mind. So no matter how beautifully I describe something, file not found, they don't have an image in their head. So me explicitly telling them is the right answer a lot of the time.
Yeah, especially because you have multiple people at the table. You're not writing a novel where you have an audience of 1, right? Obviously more than one person reads your book, right? Like hopefully, Jim.
Burn.
But when you have an audience of 1, and what I mean by that is like there's 1 reader at a time, right? So, but when you have 4 people at the table, the person who asked the question, they might actually hear that cool show don't tell description you just gave. But the other 3 people at the table might, like Ryan just said, might be doing math on their character sheet or thinking about what feat they're going to take at next level, or totally distracted on playing Candy Crush on their phone. So yeah, I think there is some advantage to just telling. I kind of gauge that by, is it early in the session? Like if it's right, if it's early in the session, everybody's fresh, they're engaged. I'm trying to set the tone, right? I'll do more show than tell at the beginning of a session. If we're in the middle of the session or at the end of the session, I'm going to do more tell than show, because like I want the pacing to keep moving, because I want, and also because attention spans are waning when you're in the second hour moving into the third hour of the game. So that's kind of my show don't tell. I kind of front load the show right at the beginning, and but as pacing increases, I do more telling. That's kind of my headspace on it.
You can also figure out if the group is going to like it based on how they role play. Are they the kind of people who want to actually literally have the conversations? or do they sometimes, or more often, summarize? You know, like, I want to ask around town for information is different from, I'm going to walk up to the first guy, see, hello, sir, how are you today? It's two different roleplay styles. And when Fred just posted this, what do you think needs to be in the social interaction section of the book? I've been thinking about this for the last couple of minutes, and that one of the things that's great about D&D is that you can be as socially interactive in the roleplay as you want, and that there aren't mechanics built around it. And while I love Powered by the Apocalypse games and a lot of those systems, they're very roleplay focused in the narrative. Like, if you can't summarize your character's actions in Thirsty Sword Lesbians, it's because the roleplay, the narrative is part of it. But in D&D, you can embrace that or not. You can say, I want to make a persuasion check on this guy. Or you can say, let's talk and roleplay it out. And either one is fine. And so, I don't know. I think the section kind of needs to be vague and present it as you could go either way. And D&D is a great intro. I think is a great onboarding and a great gateway drug to other RPGs because of that. Because if you're not comfortable doing that deep role play, you can play D&D just fine without it.
And I think that's what the social interaction section of the book should say. I think they should make that explicit. Hey, there are skills here, and you can use them, but you don't have to use them. If someone presents a compelling argument, whether they have summarized that or delivered it in character, that can be enough. And you can leave it at that, and you don't have to bring dice into it. If the outcome is clear to you, the dungeon master, you can declare success or failure. If the flip side, the king is never going to abdicate his throne, a natural 20 is not going to do it. I don't care if you have a plus 15. The skills, and this is true for other skill checks, and they kind of make that explicit, but like in the social side of the thing, having skills is almost a crap. It's a fallback, and it looks like the default because I have invested points that I could have put into other hitting harder sort of abilities into charisma and persuasion. That's cool. That signals to me, the dungeon master, that you want to do those things more often, probably. But also, it's like it's a safety net, right? I'll even give you like passive insight, passive persuasion. You aren't necessarily as socially adept or convincing and persuasive as a person. I'm not going to penalize you the same way I'm not going to penalize the barbarians player for like not physically being able to lift whatever amount of weight that their character's lifting. But we're all capable of speech in one way or another. We're all being able to communicate if we're playing this game together. That can be the beginning and the end of the conversation.
Yeah, I would almost, if I was to write this section, I would probably present it as, here are two distinct ways to approach social interactions and describe how to do a skill challenge. Right? And then describe how to do a role-playing encounter with the advice that they give here. Right? And then say the third option lies somewhere in between. I think so. I would present it as, here are two different ways to do social encounters, and the third way is however you blend those two things together. How much do you want to use role play? How much do you want to use skill challenge? Right. I think that's how I would present it to make it like as clear and concise as I could.
And since we're sort of dancing around this topic, right next in the DMG is this section on using other ability scores, and I really, really like this. I wish this advice was more in the player's handbook. It says, consider these things to give characters whose charisma is not their strong suit a chance to shine, like strength. An NPC won't talk to the characters until one of them agrees to an arm wrestling match. Or a strong character needs to bodily prevent an NPC from running away. This is great because charisma characters do dominate the RP scenes, right? And maybe some players like that. Maybe that's why the guy is playing the barbarian with the charisma of 8. Because he doesn't want to roleplay, but maybe he just wants to be a barbarian, but he also wants to participate in the roleplay scenes. So this idea of using other skills other than persuasion, deception, and performance, which is basically 90% of what gets used in conversation. I think this is brilliant, and I wish this advice was more player facing, to give them ideas of like, if you're not the face of the party, here's how you can still contribute to social interaction.
Yeah. Well, and another thing I've done is use like race, class, and background to give players an advantage, right? So if you're talking to a dwarf, the dwarf NPC might be more receptive to the dwarf player character, right? Mm-hmm. You're having the conversation in a temple, the cleric might have advantage on persuasion or investigation checks, right? Because they're familiar with these surroundings, they're familiar with these type of people. Somebody whose background says they were a sailor, right? If you're interacting with a pirate captain, they might have advantage on those interactions, right? So that's the other thing that I've done. And sometimes I'll actually use that as an excuse to give players additional information. Well, you're the cleric, you would know this. You're the druid, you would know that, right? Mm-hmm. So you're avoiding the dice roll, right? So you're not locking information behind the dice roll when you're doing the ladder example, right? And you're rewarding the players for choices they made in character creation. By identifying here's how your class, your background, and your species helps you in these social encounters or in these investigation encounters.
And I think that goes a long way to addressing this, which is a legit problem that I've wrestled with, where I'm much quicker to take the social skills out of the game than other skills. So I will reward players for having proficiency. If you're proficient in whatever, his history, the knowledge skills come up more in my game. But, oh yeah, you're good at that. I'm going to give you passive persuasion. You have a, +6 and you're proficient in it. Okay, cool. I'm going to say that you get a 16 naturally without even bringing the chaos rocks into the thing. That's kind of my way of threading that needle, where it's not a waste to invest in those things in character creation. I'm still rewarding it, and in fact, I'm making it less likely that you're going to roll a 1 and biff it, and your carefully crafted argument just falls on deaf ears.
Yeah, and there's a nuance to it, like Fred's saying here, and you kind of have to switch back and forth between the two, right? Like there's a nuance to it that you just kind of you find your own flow as a dungeon master, I think, over the course of playing the game, as you get more and more experience. But I think there's also, you can, if you want to be consistent, you can make the player roll even when they've had a very eloquent role play, presentation, right? They just poured their heart out, and then they roll, and you're like, well, that's the way it sounded in your head, but that's not the way it came out, right? So because we've all had that experience in real life, right? Where you felt like you made an impassioned plea, or you were very clear and concise in your instructions, and the other person just, did not compute, right? We've had that experience in real life.
It's like the Billy Madison of that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, and we were all dumber for having heard it.
Yeah. So, if you don't set the difficulty check too high, I think it's fine to make the players roll even when they do a good job of role play. You can do both.
Yeah. Story time. I had a player approach a banshee in Lost Mine of Pamplin. So a lot of people already would know Agatha. She's in the books too. The player approached her, had an offering, was very circumspect, did all the right things. I was like, all right, I'm lowering the DC, and I'm giving you advantage. 2 natural ones. It's okay, 1 in 400. Boom, she pops her horrifying visage. Everybody runs away. And that's, sometimes the dice tell a story too. I could have called it, but if it were not a banshee, right? Maybe it would have been like, okay, cool, like they're receptive. But this is a volatile creature. I don't know. Ryan doesn't know exactly how she would react. I leave it to the dice, and then I ran with it. I kind of regretted it for a second in the moment. I was like, yeah, the dice are telling a story here. There is nothing you could do on that given day to convince this 1,000-year-old undead monstrosity that she wanted to talk to you. You did a very good job, so she didn't outright kill all of you right then and there.
I like Phil's suggestion here. Monster, their interwisdom or charisma is the DC for the roll.
Mm.
I like that idea. I also like the idea of rolling under your int score to try to learn something. I've done that before. Like, I use this example in a video. The party was watching people playing some kind of local card game, and my player was like, do I understand how this works? I was like, roll a d20. If you roll under your int, you get it. If you don't, it's beyond you. Very simple, easy to understand. Anyway.
I like
roll
roll
under.
under.
Crackers in my mouth.
I like the limbo method. I like roll under. On skill checks.
I've never been able to get past the, I guess, very, I don't know if it's a masculine mindset or American mindset, like the higher is better.
Yeah, it's like definitely lizard brain, like big number good. Like,
right. Yeah. So, but I mean, from a game design standpoint, roll under is a far more efficient system because you skip the step of having to add a modifier. Like, the dungeon master doesn't have to set the difficulty check. The player looks down at their sheet, knows what they need to roll, and they roll and see if they do it or not. Like, you're skipping 2 extra steps. So roll under is a very efficient way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Mothership has a roll under system for their sanity, their panic system, and it's great because every time something terrible happens, you get a point of panic, and then you roll the D10 or D20 or whatever it is, and you just have to roll. Or no, wait, I'm thinking of something else. That's roll over. I got confused. Let's just skip past that and pretend I didn't say anything.
A lot of old school games have roll under. Like Old School Essentials is built on roll under. For skills and then not for combat. So there is a code switching thing that happens, which gives some people a little more of a cognitive load, but gives other people like more of a separation between like the two sides of the game. So it comes down to preference.
So the last part, I think we could handle maybe one more little topic in this is the next section is about attitude, where every creature is either friendly, indifferent, or hostile. And now this is old school D&D. This was like first or second edition D&D had this, and I think they called it morale. Was this the same thing as morale? I don't.
Reaction rolls very similar to morale. Morale is whether or not we're going to break rank, which I'll still do. I'll still do like wisdom saves sometimes at bloodied or like the leader goes out. Like I'll use that too.
But I guess my question with this is, and this is kind of funny because this is closer toward that Veil Guard game style that I was discussing an hour ago, because this is like quantifying how people feel and quantifying progress, that kind of thing. You have a numerical score for how everyone feels about you. And I do think it's important to track how important NPCs feel about the party. Sometimes even important members of the party, because an NPC might like some members of the party but not others. And it's good to track that stuff. I'm not sure. I just don't know if I'm sold on friendly, indifferent, or hostile. What do you guys think about this?
Well, the way it was described in the 2014, right, was like that it kind of gamified it a little bit. So if the NPC was hostile, then you could make charisma checks to try to shift them away from being hostile towards you, try to get them to like you, right? And so then the attitude would shift from hostile to indifferent, and I think there was a recommendation that you don't allow two shifts in one social encounter, but you might come back in a later social encounter and try to get them from indifferent to friendly, right? And then so they had kind of gamified the social interactions with these three criteria.
Phil says something interesting here. Phil says this is their initial disposition, which I don't think it actually says that here.
I think that was the header of the table for the reaction roll. I think that, like the old whatever, I think it's advanced. That's the 2d6 table is initial disposition, like in a random encounter or whatever it is.
Right. It doesn't actually say that anything about that here. It just says has one of the following attitudes.
No.
I wonder if that's supposed to be implied that it has that attitude upon meeting the party.
I think, Jimmy, that you made a very good point that can come in handy in situations where one player has presented a very good thing and then, or like an appealing thing to a particular NPC, and then another player jumps in and screws it all up. Where you can have this NPC can have individual relationships within the party and like, hey, I'm willing to work with you as long as that guy shuts up. So that it's not just one group decision. I do that a lot, especially depending on player table composition.
That's the dwarf NPC who has a thing for half elves. It's like, you can come, handsome.
I'll do that in one game, but not the other game. Too many unknowns. Too many unknowns to open those doors.
I'm trying to remember back in first edition, there were like clear steps when you had like a random encounter, right? Where you would roll, and I forget the specifics, but it was like you would determine the monster's like initial disposition, you would determine their distance, and I want to say there was a third thing. So you could pick an encounter or roll a random encounter, and then you had those different criteria of like, you know, how far away the monster is, what their attitude is, and you know what, I can't remember what the third one was, but there was specific, you know, it was kind of spelled out. I thought that was actually a useful design to kind of give you surprise. Yeah, that's what it was. So if the creature was in hiding or, you know, trying to, you know, pounce or whatever. But yeah, so I thought that was a useful set of tools to establish, you know, the criteria for the beginning of an encounter. Whether the players responded, you know, socially or combative, right? You had that disposition and distance, you know, kind of established.
I'm a huge advocate for what are the monsters doing? Whether it's a random encounter, it's a dungeon room and it's totally static and you know they're going to come across it. Like, are these guys getting drunk and playing poker? Are they on guard duty? Are they snoozing? Are they celebrating some obscure Goblin Bacchanalia holiday? Like, what is up? And that informs what they want and how they're going to react to you. You know, the guy on the toilet's going to do something different than the guy with the crossbow pointed at the door waiting for you to come in the door. Straight up. And that makes the world feel alive for me, and that makes the players have interesting choices. It's like, again, you're showing and telling what the monster is going to be open to, or the NPC is going to be open to.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you read the module and it says there's a bugbear, a hobgoblin, and 3 goblins in the room, and the treasure chest in the room has a pair of magic scimitars, right? That's what the book says is in the room, you know. And if you could just have it, the players walk in and roll initiative, right? Or you have it so that as the players get to the door, they hear the 2 voices arguing with each other. It's a matched set. I want both of them, you know. And, you know, and then the players peek through the cracked door and they see the three goblins are goofing around at the table, watching the hobgoblin and the bugbear argue with each other over the two magic scimitars, right? Each one has a scimitar. Now there's a scene, and with that setup, players can make informed choices, and it makes it like you're saying, Ryan, a far more living, breathing world when you do that.
All right. Any last thoughts on attitude or anything that we didn't cover? Anything I skipped over in those two little sections that we got to today?
Well, like I said, I think if I was reworking this section of the book, I would present the two different extremes and then discuss how you can land in the middle. I think that's the kind of the best approach here. Like we've talked about.
Okay. Now, I don't have the right thing prepared, but we're going to go with what we got. All right. So, to wrap up the show, if you stuck all the way from the beginning to this point because of my clickbaity promise, thank you for sticking with the show. And so, I have one last little recommendation. Coming up in about 4 months from now, it's mid-March, in Estes Park, Colorado, there is going to be a celebration called Frozen Dead Guy Days.
Ooh.
Now, this is a little festival. It used to happen in this teeny tiny mountain town called Nederland, but they moved to Estes Park, Estes Park is where the Stanley Hotel is, what The Shining was based on. Estes Park is much, much bigger place. Lots of room. But this is so the story is there's this guy, his grandfather died. The guy couldn't afford to have a funeral for his grandpa, so he put him on ice and put him in a tough shed in Nederland, Colorado. When he is still there in the tough shed. The frozen dead guy is in the tough shed. So there's this celebration of the macabre. They have coffin races, where it's you build a little coffin, you race people around. What I don't think I have any, let's see if I have any pictures of the actual racing. See, there's this guy carrying a coffin. Polar bear plunge. My favorite part is they have a monster truck show, all these cars made out of hearses. There's people from all over the world build these monster truck hearses, and they bring them and parade them. It's absolutely wild. It's the kind of I don't know, every little mountain town has their own weird little festival, but this one got huge because it's crazy. It's about a frozen dead guy. People go drink beer and listen to music in the mountains and do polar bear plunges. And if you can come, now's a good time to get tickets. But it would be I don't know if I would travel across the world if you live in another country, but it's worth seeing. Frozen Dead Guy Days. It's worth seeing one time in your life. That is my recommendation.
That sounds cool. And bringing this all back to D&D, festivals are a great way to show, not tell, with your world building. I love throwing a festival into an adventure to set up storytelling devices.
Speaking of frozen dead guys, in Secret Level, what appears to be a white dragon for a couple establishing shots turns out to be something else, which I don't think it's not in the standard monster manual. So do either of you, or does anyone in chat who has seen the show know if that's a bog standard D&D creature? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I assumed it was a giant bat. I mean, technically, the giant bats are medium, aren't they? But you could have a large giant bat that you could ride as a mount. That's what I assumed it was.
An XL albino giant bat?
Yeah.
It was pretty dope. There's a lot of cool things in there, but I was like, oh, I need more weird giant bats in my games. Giant bats to me are not giant enough, apparently. And I'm gonna step up.
Fred, when I lived in Australia and I moved back to the US, I moved at the end of Australian winter, so I got to have 2 winters in a row.
Oh, that sounds awful.
It was terrible. But I much prefer Colorado winters to Australian winters. They are brutal. It rains every day, and it's that freezing, cold, horrible rain that just sinks down into your bones. Anyway.
I was wrong. A giant bat is a large beast.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh.
Even though it's only a challenge rating 1/4, it's a large beast. So you have more bad guys riding on giant bats, Ryan. Apparently, that's the cool thing to do.
I'm going to do it.
Mm.
And then that
There
like
you go.
stunning strike shove off the bridge combo. Ooh. Go watch it, guys. It's 15 minutes. It's 15. King of the North.
Why am I king of the North?
You're king of
I
the.
like snow.
You're king of the top.
Tell Lord Tywin, winter is coming for him. It's the only line I remember from that show. Anyway, all right. So hey, we are the Landlocked Warlocks. I'm Jim. That is,
I'm Ryan.
and that is.
I'm Brad.
We are the Landlocked Warlocks. Thanks for watching us, and stay tuned for more cool stuff coming because it is coming. And we'll see you.